Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Andrew Ross Sorkin's Too Big to Fail. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview about what the book is about, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Andrew Ross Sorkin has been a journalist for many years on the CNBC show network television show Squawk Box. So he's a journalist mostly involved in the financial industry. He's been doing this for quite a long time. He recently came out with a book on, I believe, the Great Depression and the financial crash of 1929, the Great Crash. Other than that, I don't know very much about him. He wrote this book when he was relatively young. This came out in, I think, hardcover in 2009. I think the paperback has an afterword set in 2010 and is about the period in 2008, from roughly March 2008 to I think it's September is when the book ends with the passage of TARP. But it's this period of time between essentially Bear Stearns falling to Lehman Brothers going bankrupt and the possibility that AIG would go bankrupt and kind of the bank bailouts. And so he interviews hundreds of people to kind of get their firsthand accounts of what happened, and kind of this really focusing on this period of time of the action by the bankers as they were trying to save the economy, and is a very thorough book if you're interested in this time period from the perspective of the bankers. You get all the major players, the CEO of Lehman Brothers, you have Jamie Dimon, you have the CEO of Goldman Sachs, you have Hank Paulson, who is at I believe this Treasury Secretary, you have Ben Bernanke, you have Tim Geithner, who was at the New York Fed. So you have all these people who have spoken to, it sounds like he got basically all the people necessary on the record to talk through these things. This book's always going to be compared to something like Barbarians at the Gate or Disney Wars, are the kind of the two books that kind of reminded me the most of. If you're interested in the book and interested in this subject and interested in this topic, I think it's very well done. I think he, for a book that has like such a heavy topic, it moves pretty well, especially I'd say the first half. When you kind of get into the second half of the book and just kind of like you see these like this roller coaster of like, will Lehman Brothers find a buyer? Will they not find a buyer? Are Barclays in or Barclays out? And just you kind of the overwhelming sense that you understand from all this is just how incestuous this world is. And you get some of the attorneys who are working for one company one week and then working for an adversarial company the following week. And that's kind of the main takeaway I got from the book, was just how interwoven this world is. So small in terms of the number of people that they've all worked for each other before, and that they all have various ethical complications from the interweavings of all this stuff. I found it to be really interesting. Hank Paulson was formerly at Goldman Sachs, and now he's in the Treasury, and so there's a constant underlining of through line of the book of him being concerned to being seen as in the tank for Goldman. I think George W. Bush, who was president at the time, had relatives who worked at Lehman Brothers, and so that's kind of a through line throughout the book that I think Andrew Ross Sorkin kind of touches on. There's not a lot of space in the book where he kind of takes a step back and says, well, ethically, what were the things that they were thinking of and what were the conflicts? You kind of see that in kind of short bursts throughout the book, and maybe that's a shortcoming of the book that could have been maybe more editorializing to make it kind of more clear, because there's so many characters and so many people, and sometimes it's hard to kind of follow the red strings as you're kind of going through this thing. I also don't know how interesting this would be to the average person. I think that there probably is like a Michael Lewis style version of this book, which is The Big Short, which is more how did we get to this point? And this is really once we were at the point where these companies were so interwoven in their dealings, and he kind of explains collateral debt obligations and credit default swaps and those things as best as you can. The kind of explanation of the mortgage-backed security and how these were securitized to allow for these like slicing and dicing that didn't previously exist. So Michael Lewis is more of the how do we get there in The Big Short, and this book is more of the once we were here at the point where these companies were going to fall like dominoes, one after another if the government didn't put backstops. What are the moral hazards related to that? What was the responsibility of the bankers? Did they have responsibility to the country? Did they have responsibility to the shareholders? Did they have responsibility to the creditors? Did they have responsibility to themselves? And kind of going through the permutations of that. At the end of the book, he has a little bit more of the rank and file legislators at the time. There's not a ton of their inputs really throughout the book until the very end, and so that is maybe kind of a criticism that I had. They kind of are in the dark until Paulson comes to them with this plan that eventually we know to be TARP, and they have a lot of criticism and critiques of it. It's not quite clear that was historically true, that they were that in the dark. It seemed strange to me, and so I was surprised that we didn't hear more about them earlier in the book. But there's some like really interesting scenes and kind of strange things that happen, and you just kind of see the world of high finance, how it's, someone's your best friend today and your worst enemy tomorrow, and they go back on deals. They have handshake deals that they ignore. They're constantly trying to find multiple buyers so they can kind of play the buyers off each other. So even in like what you would think to be like the most extreme circumstances, they become they become bankers. They didn't seem to have a lot of like qualms about the amount of money that they were making in all of this. To be fair to the Lehman guy, I think that the Lehman Brothers, Dick Fuld, who is the guy who's the CEO of Lehman Brothers when that goes bankrupt, essentially, he had most of his money tied into Lehman, and so he really doesn't walk away with all that much. And the other part of it I thought was lacking, and this is really not so much Andrew Ross Sorkin's fault because this is written very much in the heat of all this stuff, is there's not a lot to talk about. What the book that I really want, this is again not Andrew Ross Sorkin's fault, it's just a book that I have not seen, is really the viewpoint of like criminality wise, was there criminality that was being done? There's another book that I read, I think it's All the Devils Are Here, and that is more about the mortgage-backed security and the lenders and less about the bankers, to see what role they played in any kind of criminality in terms of these things. And Andrew Ross Sorkin, kind of in his afterword, is writing in like 2010. He says something to the effect of, the Obama administration is clearly trying to move past this. And they kind of had these statements about being angry about the bankers making a bunch of money in bonuses relatively soon after this happened, which was true. But then there seemed to be a relative lack of criminal prosecutions of many of these things, despite having whistleblowers, which is a whole nother thing. So that's the book that I want. That's not Andrew Ross Sorkin's fault for not writing that book, but just to give someone a sense of like what this book is and what it's not really about how did we get here with the mortgage-backed securities. That's really The Big Short. And All the Devils Are Here. It's not really about a look at criminality. That's really more All the Devils Are Here, even though that book not super great at it. This is really more about, from the banker's point of view, what did this look like? What was kind of the almost minute by minute breakdown of these 6 months when the financial system was kind of teetering on the verge of collapse, because there was this idea that everything was going to topple. Because maybe for those who don't know, collateral debt obligations, as I understand them, which is a very, very layman's person perspective, but it's essentially assurance. It's essentially assurance and policy. It's essentially an insurance policy, basically saying if this event happens, we're going to get paid money. And as I understand it, it's not like a home insurance policy to where your house is worth $100,000. You can buy an insurance policy on the house and you're going to be covered if the house is destroyed. You'll be given the $100,000. This is basically like multiple parties can place insurance policies against the same asset. So the value of the policy itself far outweighs the value of the asset, because the asset value can fluctuate over time. Can rapidly decrease over time. And these were all kind of things that came into effect basically in the 90s from the Clinton administration and the Republican Congress, who deregulated a lot of the actions that were taken by the federal government after the Great Depression in order to clean up the financial industry. So this book is really like the personalities of what these people were doing. It's not so much big picture, like how did we get here? And it's not really even so much after this period of time, what regulations were put into place in order to prevent this from happening. And excuse me, and Andrew Ross Sorkin kind of talks about how it doesn't look like, there's a lot that was being done to clean up this industry, and that seems to be true. So if you're someone who likes Barbarians at the Gate, if you're someone who liked The Big Short and found that interesting, if you someone who liked Disney Wars and wanted to see kind of the different squabbles of the different personalities, you're probably going to like this book. It is long and there's a lot of people, but it's essentially the closest I've seen to like a minute by minute, nearly minute by minute, hour by hour look at this time period between March of 2008 and the passage of TARP, which I believe was September or October of that year. So, yeah, there's some asides that I don't think were needed, but for the most part, it's 555 pages. My paperback is. He probably could have trimmed a little bit about that. If you're someone who just like could not care less about the book, you're gonna know within reading like 50 pages of it this is the book for you or not for you. If none of that sounds interesting, don't read this book because you're not gonna enjoy it. But that is Andrew Ross Sorkin's Too Big to Fail. Next time I'm going to be reading Polybius, I believe is how it's pronounced. If you've enjoyed the channel, please feel free to subscribe. If you're not subscribed already, please feel free to leave a like, leave a comment below. If you want to, I'll leave my Twitter. Have you read Too Big to Fail? I know this book came out quite a while ago. And it was interesting to me to watch this, or read the book and kind of apply it to current situations in the financial markets. And how much the federal government should be involved in financial markets is always an open question, but watching different parties kind of come to different conclusions, I thought was also one of the more interesting things about this book. So, as always, thank you for watching. Until next time, bye.